It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Joining me on Accelerate today is Mike Saunders. He's an authority marketing strategist, talk show host on the Business Innovators Radio Network, and author of Authority Selling, Opening More Doors to Closing More Business. Mike, welcome to Accelerate.
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. So take a minute, fill out that rather sketchy introduction I gave.
Oh, it's not sketchy at all. It hits all the high points. But a little bit of my background is I teach marketing strategy for 3 different universities. I've got a private digital marketing agency called Marketing Huddle, and focus on marketing and sales. And the strategy that I approach is authority positioning, which when you think about marketing, it's really gaining attention from your target audience for your products or services. And there's so much noise and buzz out there that you have to do something to stand out. And, it used to be that, you advertise on TV and the commercials, you got to crank up the volume and that captures someone's attention, and then that doesn't work anymore. So it's always something. But when you can focus on being a respected and reputable expert and authority in your niche, in your market, that really starts to have a lot of overarching benefits that cover so many things that make some traditional marketing strategies either perform better or some strategies not even as needed. As an example,
let's hold on for a second. Let's get back to that. But first, you dropped some things out there we got to follow up on. So you teach at 3 different universities. So which universities do you teach at?
Teach at Grand Canyon University and Colorado Christian University, and a little school out in Wisconsin called Cardinal Stritch University. And teach everything from marketing strategy to brand management to marketing 101.
So Cardinal Stritch. So I don't know that. Where in Wisconsin is that?
Yeah, it's just near Madison. It's a very small private university, and
I'm from Madison originally, so that's why I was interested.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
Okay, so you teach at 3 different universities, marketing, and now do you still host your radio show?
Yep. I just surpassed 140 episodes there, which is, not a lot in a lot of worlds, but it's a lot compared to where you started from. But yeah, I love connecting with people. I know I'd interviewed you a few months back, and it's just really neat when you can talk to someone in like a masterminding, brainstorming type session, as opposed to answer this question and then let's answer this question.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on your show. That was great fun. So, getting back to authority selling, it's if you're saying the problem you're trying to solve with the book and with this, not just the book, but the work you do around this, is that it's to break through the noise.
Yeah.
Basically. And so who is the book written for?
I say small business owners, entrepreneurs, and sales professionals, because no matter what we sell, you think about even a relationship, you're selling the fact that, hey, hon, I want to go see this movie this weekend. So there's things that we always are selling. So you don't have to only be a sales professional, or you don't have to only be a business owner. So it's just really anyone that needs to get their message across to their target audience so that a transaction takes place.
Okay. So in a personal relationship, let's say you're married, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do you use you opened the door to using that in a relationship? How do you use authority selling with your wife?
It doesn't apply to marriages. I'll just say that. So you asked who it applies to.
You brought that up. I just thought I'd go through that.
Maybe that's a follow-up book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That could be an interesting one, right? So, yeah, all this idea about selling within a relationship, I think, is it's going to be a topic of an episode one of these days. But it's fraught with uncertainty. So,
exactly.
So it seems like that's sort of the fundamental challenge for any seller, anybody selling anything, is to establish you can call it credibility, and I think that I don't know. Is there a difference between credibility and authority?
I'm sure you could make the case for or against. I would say there are a lot of similarities because to be credible, you have to be trustworthy, or else people are going to kind of look at you down their nose and go, yeah. Because you can make really, large claims, and they're going to be so large and so, odd and off the wall that people aren't going to view you as credible. So I think you have to have that credibility from the trust factor.
Sure.
And then it merges into, the more, kind of like throwing out the breadcrumbs for the ducks at the pond. At some point they trust you enough to kind of get a little closer and eat a little bit more. So that's what we're doing with our prospects. So that credibility builds into authority is how I would say that it relates.
Yeah, but I mean, and the reason I asked the question is, there's certainly a lot of people that are involved with selling a product or service that are competent.
Yes.
But you wouldn't call them authorities in what they do. I mean, they may have even some expertise, but you wouldn't necessarily label them as an authority. So, that's why I was wondering how you perceive the difference between the two.
Yeah, here's something to think about. I don't think that you need to strive for being a nationally known celebrity, in X niche or industry. Because I think that in your sphere of influence, you can be that large fish in the small pond. Because think about, how you market and sell and network right now. It doesn't matter, like Grant Cardone says he wants to be known by 7 billion people or his name known. So you don't necessarily need to be that at that level. But for the typical entrepreneur or salesperson, if their sphere of influence or their network or their audience knew that they are the fill in the blank, expert, the car expert, the annuities expert, the whatever they do, then all of a sudden that's all you care about.
Yeah, I mean, I right. As I like to joke, I'm very famous within a very small circle. So, I have a fervent group of fans, but they're not 7 billion people. They're much, much smaller.
Yeah, but you know what? Just like how Seth Godin teaches in tribes.
Sure.
You wrap your arms around your tribe and you listen and you give and you serve and you pour into them. And then when you hear that they are asking for or mentioning, boy, it sure would be nice if, this, or sure would be nice if we had that. Now you are crafting your next offering, whatever it might be, product, service, or otherwise, based on what that tribe is saying. So yeah, it doesn't really matter how big that pond is. Now it has to be substantive enough that you can make a living, but I think that the deeper you go and the more trust you build, really helps. And for those people, the people that are kind of on the fringe or the outside, what's going to make them give you even half a second of attention? It's got to be more than just that random email or that flyer or that buy now, come in this weekend only kind of a approach.
Well, is it the difference between being interesting and compelling? I mean, interesting is, that's kind of interesting. I get back to it. Compelling is, I need to do something now.
Yeah, it is something where, even in the Ultimate Sales Machine, we learned from Chet Holmes that there's only like 3% of people interested in your product or service right this second, right now. And everyone's clamoring for that 3%. But if you can focus on the people that are going to be interested in the near future, now all of a sudden you're widening that net. But whether it's for the people that are interested right now, they need to close now or buy now or make that decision now, or in the near future, my contention is you have a competitor. Anybody that is listening to this or is thinking about their business or their product or service, you have a competitor. And whether it's someone down the street or someone on the next line down on Google when they're searching for your keyword or your product, they can go somewhere else. And most people do not only talk to one place, one provider, they're going to talk to multiple. What is going to make you stand out, memorable, credible, authoritative, whatever word we want to insert there. And my thought in writing this book is just making that concept that so many people feel like they're looking on the outside in going, well, I can't get on this TV show, or I don't have 9 books published. But in your small world, you can accomplish those same things without a lot of extra work or special connections. You don't need to know, huge names to get this kind of authority built up, and then using that authority, because every single piece or event, I call them authority positioning assets. You need to, collaborate or compile them up and then use them in your business.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about, because they're part of your authority positioning portfolio. So, but a concept that you bring out early on, which I think is an important one to explore, is what you call the expertise gap. So seller needs to understand the expertise gap. So tell people what you mean by that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that know facts about something that, my product does this or my service does that. And the problem is the expertise gap it really goes both ways. If you think about it in this perspective, you as the consumer have an expertise gap because you don't know what you don't know about that product or service. So once you are told about certain elements or aspects about this product or service, now that's closing the gap in your own mind, and you're understanding, oh, well, I didn't realize that you should take this into consideration. But here's I think a bigger piece of it. There's so many people, whether it's an entrepreneur, business owner, or sales professional, and they know that they are good, but they might not feel justified to think of themselves as an expert or an authority. And there's a gap in their own perspective and their own mind. And once they get past that and can realize that they are authoritative, they're not the world's #1 leading authority on whatever, but once they can realize they're authoritative, now all of a sudden that projects so much stronger to that prospect because they're believing it themselves.
Right. Okay. One of the things that you talk about in the book is that, and I thought interesting way of putting it is that challenge for buyers today is distinguishing between what they want to pay attention to and what they should pay attention to.
Yeah.
And it speaks to a large issue about just distraction. But how do you see this applying for sellers? Why sellers need to understand this challenge?
Well, it gets down to that sense of urgency. Think about maybe, a home security system company. And, the homeowner might realize, I should protect my family more. But they're not compelled to do it as much as if their neighbor across the street has a break-in this weekend. And then all of a sudden they see the police cars and they hear what happened and they're going, I need to do something right now. So at that point, you're not just buying a pencil and your only choice is, do I want this color or that color? Because it's such a commodity. At that point, you're driving toward, now I need to do something. Are you going to, ask around to your circle of friends, to 20 people, to say, who would you recommend? Maybe a couple here or there, but you're going to go to whatever means, whether, hey, I got a flyer on my door just last week and it's still on the counter, or I'm going to go Google, your hometown and, home security. But what's going to happen is you're going to see these first impressions. And if you see an old antiquated website, as an example, and you glance at that, you're not going to be as compelled to reach out for a phone conversation as if it's a nice enough website. You don't need, massive, huge amounts of money on a website, but just that first impression. And then what if there are some of these authority markers where that at least could get you to have that conversation? And I think too many people think, oh, well, when I do XYZ 1, 2, 3 here for authority positioning, that's going to solve every problem. My prospects won't have any objections, they won't have any questions, and they fall at my feet and throw money. And that's never the case. But with these kinds of, we wish. But with these kinds of approaches, it's going to make some of those things easier. Okay.
So you brought before this idea of authority positioning asset, which are part of what you call your authority positioning portfolio. So describe top line what you mean by authority positioning portfolio, and then let's talk about what some of these assets are that comprise this.
Yeah, think about like a graphic designer and they go pitch to a prospect and they're going to bring out this large, portfolio and they're going to open up, hey, here's my design of this and here's my design of that. So many industries don't have any kind of physical portfolio or, maybe here's this website and here's a link to all of my work. Well, if you think about it as a portfolio, as a, maybe a collaboration or bringing everything, that you've done in that realm into one place. So a portfolio would be all of your authority positioning assets where you can have easy access to them. And think about it as even like a flash drive, or a thumb drive. Here's a branded thumb drive with your logo on it, your website on it, and you're meeting with a prospect. And, as you leave, you leave that with them and say, hey, here's some of the, our proposal and some of the projects that I've recently worked on, you can review. So it's something that you can easily access. And maybe it's even on your website. On my website, I call it an authority positioning portfolio, and it's unique enough that people would look at it and go, I wonder what that is. But it really is just all of the assets that you are combining together, really. And it could be, hey, I was had some media mentions here. I was interviewed on this podcast, this radio show. If you are lucky enough to, be on a TV show, but anything that you are doing that is visible, and it could be a variety of things. It doesn't have to be the large, spotlight things. It's just a variety of these things. Of course, some of the bigger ones like, I was just published. Here's my first book or my second book. But for the people just starting off, it could be very, very simple things where now all of a sudden on this one page on your website or on this, a piece like a flash drive or even something fancier, if you would like, that you're able to pre-position yourself even before a big pitch or as a leave behind to kind of solidify the deal so that when people peruse through it, they're really, really convinced of that. And is someone going to listen to every syllable of every single radio interview that you've done? Probably not. But the fact that you were there and they kind of listen a little bit, or are they going to read every word of this press release you were mentioned in or every word of your book? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that you have this put together is very, very authoritative in this sense. Your competitor probably doesn't have that. So when they're kind of weighing those options, that really, really is a big, big piece.
Okay, so I expect to see Accelerate under I'm looking at your authority positioning portfolio now.
Yeah, exactly. I that's exactly what I do. And, I practice what I preach. And I think that's sometimes people are like, oh, hey, yeah, you do that. And here's a quick example. I interviewed someone on my show a few months back, and he was immigrating from Israel to the United States, and he needed an immigration attorney to do the paperwork. And he had seen this attorney that said, hey, free consultation. And so he, kind of made a mental note of that. And then this friend of his referred him to another attorney that was giving a keynote speech at, maybe the local chamber, and that guy was charging for a consultation. Well, you have a free, consultation or a charged consultation, and he chose the one where he had to pay money. And he said he really felt like that attorney, because they were speaking and they had a book that they were talking about, that person he felt confident with going, and it was worth the whatever it was for the consultation, and he ended up working with that person. So does that work every single time? No, but just I think subconsciously and even consciously, we find ourselves drawn to the people that kind of already have gotten that, pat on the back and maybe vetting from whatever the place, hey, whoever the chamber was that invited them to speak, obviously he's halfway decent because they had him speak, or, hey, here's a copy of my book. So, and it just elevates you above that competitor so much more that it at least grabs their attention enough for you to make that initial impression.
Okay, so some of the key steps then in terms of building this portfolio, I think, and you spent a lot of time talking about media as one way to do that. Get on radio shows, get on TV shows, and so on. But it seems like a pretty daunting prospect for a lot of entrepreneurs, certainly salespeople. So how do you recommend they approach that?
Yeah, I think you just like a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You have the big picture, and then you want to at least make some strides toward that. Do you try to get on your city's largest radio show so that you can say you're on there? Maybe not right away, but maybe you can get on some podcasts. Do you try to get in the Wall Street Journal? Probably not. That's that's like one of those revered publications. But could you get mentioned in the media because you make a connection with some of your local reporters that cover some of the topics you touch on? Here's another thought too. A lot of people feel like writing a book is just some long process, and I propose a process that is more a book for business development purposes. And I think there's a lot of people that feel like I want to write my life story and I want it to be picked up for a Pulitzer Prize or for awards. And that's a different kind of a book. But if you can use a book for business development, that's a huge piece. Think of this too, though. In my book, I talk about social proof. And, you think about even us, you Google around for a restaurant to go to and you see a bunch of reviews and you see a bunch of good, a bunch of bad. We're swayed by that. So on our authority positioning portfolio page or whatever that you use in your business, you need to have some of that social proof. So that could be something as simple as some of these testimonials and reviews from current and past customers and clients. And that's easy to get. That's free. That's not trying to get on media or writing a book. So there's so many ways that you can create these authority positioning assets. You just got to be diligent about it. You got to have structure. You got to have a system to do that. And then once you have it all put together, and you don't need to wait till you have 9 of these or 3 of these, you just need to start then having the system to where, okay, now I've got this meeting with the prospect in a week and a half, and I've been trying to land him all quarter, finally got the meeting. How can you make sure that meeting goes really well? And that's when you can use the authority positioning portfolio in your selling process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a clear differentiator. I mean, and that I think is so important these days, is that we're in an environment, products and services are so easily copied, they become commodities very quickly, things devolve into a price sale. How do you differentiate yourself? It starts with the salesperson. It starts with the seller, the person actually doing the selling. Is the first line of differentiation these days. So yeah, having that authority positioning portfolio, I think makes sense. And some of the things you talk about, very, very easy to start doing. For instance, being a guest on a podcast, there are tens of thousands of podcasts out there. So almost, I can guarantee, almost like if you go onto YouTube and search for something having to do with your area of expertise, no matter how obscure you might think it is or how focused, there's going to be some content there about it. And similarly about podcasts. I mean, there's podcasts, just about nearly everything. It's easy enough to find out who's in charge and send them an email and see if there's a fit between you and their audience.
Yeah, you're exactly
and even
right.
If the audience isn't that big, the fact that, to your point, is you can put this on as part of your authority positioning portfolio that, hey, I was on these shows.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to be a thought leader like you, Mike, or an author like myself to be on podcasts. The fact is, anybody can be on podcasts, and you should try that as part of what you're trying to achieve. You could be a professional services provider, and all you do is serve clients in. You're in the Denver area, right, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, in the Denver area. Then there's still people listening to podcasts about that, and that's relevant to them.
Yeah, and you know what? How did potentially? I'll throw this out, and I know that it's not every single time, but how did those listeners find that really segmented podcast? And I would submit to you that they were Googling around looking for whatever that is, yarn, how to knit, yarn, whatever the case is, or underwater basket weaving or something, whatever they're interested in. And now all of a sudden they're Googling around for that. Well, I think I might have mentioned this before, not in this interview, but I know in the book I did. But have you ever read the book ZMOT, which stands for Zero Moment of Truth?
Yeah, I've read some, and you bring that up in your book. And I've read articles online about it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, super powerful. And anyone interested, just Google Zmot, and it's a free ebook. It's written by an ex Google employee, and it's just spectacular. And the gist of it is, it's kind of like those breadcrumbs, like digital breadcrumbs. When you do anything online, whether it's a blog post or an interview or anything, it's going to be picked up and indexed by Google. So if someone is, worried about or concerned about a certain problem that they're experiencing, they're Googling about it. Well, if you have positioned yourself with being on a podcast or a radio show or writing a blog post or whatever the case is, fill in the gap with any of those things. Another benefit is your prospects will be more apt to find those because they're going to be online. Another thing that goes right along with that is, how about today's journalists? It used to be that they, held all the cards and they were the journalists. Well, nowadays they're out on social media and Google looking for sources for the stories they're working on. So once you have been building up your authority positioning portfolio and getting it out there online and guest blog posts, guest podcast, and all of those things, at some point, maybe your name starts coming up and they're contacting you to say, hey, can you comment on X? And now that media mention is coming because you've been diligent about getting those authority positioning assets out there. Because every time you do that, of course, you need to put it out on your social media, your email, your blog, and all of those things. But then that can kind of build and compound upon itself because your prospects could see it, and that could open up a sales conversation. And then journalists could see it, and that could open up a media contact.
Well, really, the motivating factor behind this has to be that you have a desire to serve, you have a desire to educate, that you're in your buyer's corner, right? Whatever challenges they have, you're an advocate for a solution, and they need to be able. That, I think, is really to me the key part of the authority positioning, is they have to feel like you're in their corner.
Yeah, and you use a really good word there, advocate, because I use that as well. You have to be an educator and an advocate for your customer or client, and they feel that. You hear, but you remember the old cliche, a salesperson, what's it going to take to get you into this deal today? And you just feel pushed and pressured. But when you come at that sales conversation, let's call it, or just in opening conversation, and you're asking questions and you're going deeper and you're going, have you thought about and have you considered and did you realize that this would? And they can feel that you're helping them and educating them and, becoming that advocate. And maybe even if you didn't close the sale on that first meeting and you left some information or emailed back and said, hey, you know what I was thinking, here's an article that I saw online, or here's a resource for you. Hey, let me know if I can help you out. All of a sudden they're like, well, when's the other shoe going to drop? Where's the buy now, push, push, push? And when it doesn't come, they really are drawn that way. And it's like I said earlier, having that authority positioning approach is going to make that scenario work just a touch better. Is it going to eliminate any objections? No. But when they can see that you've been out there doing this and interviewing that, and maybe you interviewed a thought leader in the industry and your prospects are like, wow, how did they have a conversation with this person? And it really just aligns you, that way as well. Then when you are having that sales conversation and becoming an educator and an advocate for them, it really sets that much better with that prospect, because they feel that you're that genuine.
Yeah. Well, I think that's absolutely true. And so if we sort of segment this into, you talked about when you're dealing with them face to face, but also, this education, the advocacy really comes through the content you create, and it's inescapable these days. If you're in business, you have a business, you're selling something, you have an obligation really to yourself and somewhat to your audience, the people that would be your natural tribe, as you talk about, is to create relevant content that helps them meet the challenges they have in their own business.
Yeah, and I think that this authority positioning approach ties together so many things so well, like content marketing, like you mentioned, and even SEO. A lot of people would say SEO is dead. Well, think about this.
You're talking about search engine optimization, right?
Search engine optimization, yes. If you could sit down and have like that editorial calendar, how you hear a lot of people talk about your social media and blog editorial calendar. What should you talk about for the next 6 months? Well, what should you talk about should be being an educator and an advocate for your target audience, tying it into how you solve their main problems. So here's a simple way to do that. Think of the top 10 questions that you get as a salesperson or an entrepreneur about your product or service, and write those 10 questions down. You could easily answer those questions in a few paragraphs and talk about them in your sleep. That's easy. Mm-hmm. But then the next step is the should ask questions. And then that goes a little bit deeper, because what are the questions that prospect should be asking, but they don't even know to ask? And if you brought that up to them, they would go, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So how does that work? And so if you now have 10 frequently asked questions and 10 should ask questions, you've got some really good depth of content. Well, now you can do so many different things with those 20 pieces of information. Think of if you go on, kind of like the networking initiative to get on some podcasts. Well, maybe you would ask, hey, you know what? I would like to cover these 3 points because these are really, really powerful for our target audience. So now each one of these interviews now has the title of, fill in the blank to whatever keywords or problem or solution. But now all of a sudden, when that podcast producer puts that out there, Google's picking up some of those keywords. When you put it out there on your blog, maybe you can tighten up the keywords, how to, avoid the 3 most devastating mistakes in whatever. And now all of a sudden, as that's being worked through your social media, through Google indexing, maybe a little bit of building some links to that through some search engine optimization, now that's tying in some traditional marketing to some authority positioning marketing, because it's not a blog post saying, buy, here's a coupon in with a countdown timer. It's maybe a blog post or about your podcast interview. And maybe you're kind of having 2 or 3 paragraphs in the blog post going, oh, and you know what? I was recently interviewed on XYZ. Take a listen here. And maybe then it pops them over from your blog post over to the podcast interview, which does 2 things. Number 1, it helps out that other podcaster get traffic to their podcast. And number 2, Google does like to see external links. So, I mean, all of these things are tying together, but you're coming at it from the point of you're the authority because you were interviewed, or you're the authority because you interviewed someone, and now you're using some of these traditional means, and you're not saying buy, there's only 2 hours left. You're being that educator and that advocate, and that really shines through really strongly.
Okay. Well, I love it. We got just a few questions left. This is a part of the show where I ask some standard questions of all my guests. And the first one's a hypothetical scenario for you, and you're the star of this particular show, in that you, Mike, in the scenario, have just been hired as VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. And the CEO and the board anxious to hit the reset button, get everything back on track as quickly as possible. So what 2 things would you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
Well, first of all, I would say thanks for warning me of these questions, because you didn't tell me, so now I'm thinking on my feed.
That's what they're there for.
Exactly. But no problem. Because what I would do is I would get everyone in a room and say, what do we do really, really good that the competitors don't do? What's our true competitive advantage? And when you can distill that into a really powerful, unique selling proposition, as they say, and so many times I meet with clients and I talk about that and say, what's your competitive advantage? And many times they're like, well, we're friendly and have low price. No. That's just features and benefits. Let's really drill in deep. And, and at the end of that conversation, it's like, hey, they feel like they actually are energized themselves because they didn't realize their competitive advantage really was X. So once you have that in place, and then you figure out who your true target audience is, right? Because if you sell cars, your target audience is not anyone who drives. It needs to be, really segmented that way. But now you know what you need to say to get their attention, and then who you need to say it to. Now I would recommend the first thing is you need to get out there and start putting together some content marketing, educationally focused pieces. Now, pieces could have 5 or 10 bullet points, like we could do blog posting. We could put out some social media posts to guide them back to the blog post. We could do webinars, teleseminars, guest blogs on other blogs, or get interviewed on other podcasts. But whatever you feel comfortable doing, that's the simplest way. You need to be creating some really, really solid content and getting the word out there. And then my thought then would be to take it up the next step, which is the big thud factor, the shock and awe, is when you go out there and like I mentioned earlier about, hey, being that speaker, where do your target audience go, online and offline? Well, maybe they're a member of the National blah, blah, blah Association. So could you become an associate member there and work toward getting to speak at some event, whether it's a regional or a national event? Well, that could be hard, but maybe if you've written the book, the 3 critical, contingencies that people in the whatever industry need to keep in mind when choosing, fill in the blank. Now, all of a sudden, if you are that published author and you can send that ahead to that meeting planner for the association you would love to speak at, maybe then that gets you in front of those target audience. And then maybe again in the example, hey, we've got a big pitch next week. You can send that ahead. Now all of a sudden you've got some substantive pieces of content, including a book with your organization logo, or maybe if it's an individual entrepreneur, your name's on it, your picture's on it, and being able to send that ahead to have all of these. And think of it like this: what the heck do I put in a book? Well, how about those 10 frequently asked questions and should ask questions, and each one of those is a chapter? Well, I can't write to save my life. Well, get on 10 podcast shows and get interviewed, and then take the recording and make it a conversationally flowing book that way.
That's why I transcribe it. Absolutely.
Just something.
Very simple.
Just something.
Okay.
So that would be my 2 things to focus on right away.
All right. Thanks. So just a few rapid fire questions. You can give me one-word answers or elaborate a little bit if you wish. So the first one is, when you, Mike, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
I would say passion and enthusiasm, because they go hand in hand. But I think that so many people can just feel that energy lift up in a conversation when they know that you believe in what you're promoting, and when you can show examples and you get excited about it. So passion, enthusiasm would be my answer.
Who's your sales role model?
I would have to say I love the old school, the Zig Ziglar. I've seen him live a few times and read his books, and so I love that. Read, of course. So you didn't say you can only pick one, but if I had to, I would have to say Zig. But I'm looking forward to February. I'm going to be in an event where Tony Robbins is speaking for 3 hours, so I'm looking forward to that as well, because he's such a motivational leader as well.
Okay, excellent. So other than your own, what's one book you think every salesperson should read?
I would have to say, I mentioned it briefly just a second ago, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes.
Okay.
Just a powerful, powerful book, and really quick read, and really some actionable items.
Yes. Yeah, great book. Should be in every salesperson's library. Okay, last question for you. What music is on your playlist these days?
Oh boy, that's a off the wall question. These days I would have to say my wife and kids are all into Christmas music, and they also love Michael Bublé. So the last CD that came into our household was Michael Bublé's latest CD, which actually is really good.
Yeah, he's good. Actually, we had a song of his in my wedding. So, okay, great, fantastic. So, Mike, thanks for joining us today, and tell people how they can find out more about you and connect with you.
Yeah, the best thing is I've got a select number of books that I am providing free of charge, and you can go to www.authoritysellingbook.com and read about the book and pick that up. And I pay for the book and you pay for the shipping, and it's just a great way to get the paperback book in your hands and read through it and see how you can implement it in your business.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, thanks again for being on the show. And friends, thank you for taking the time to join me today and join us today. And remember, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is take a minute, subscribe to this podcast, Accelerate. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Mike Saunders, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show.
If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.